Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Rebecca, and welcome to my animation factory. So for the past few months, I've been living in my own world of pure Android animation. So basically, everything that I'm touching or working on, I'm very excited, and I try to find a way to animate it and make it look awesome. So today, I hope to share with you some of the different things that I've learned and some of the different animations that I've made, and hopefully inspire you to go and create your own animations and maybe having learned something from this presentation as well. So a little bit of background about me. I'm an Android dev who works at a company called Over, where a lot of the examples that I'm sharing with you today are within that app. And I come all the way from South Africa, so I'm very, very excited to be in Paris for the first time. And thank you for the wonderful weather this weekend. That was great. So, we've all seen some really cool examples of animation in different apps. So the first one we may have seen earlier if you attended the MotionLayout talk. That one is done using MotionLayout. There is my personal favorite, the Jelly toolbar, which has got a lot of nice wobble to it. And there's also some cool, like, Android animated vector drawable animations, as well as some custom view animations as well. So these are some examples of animation that you may have seen, and you may have seen some other apps that you've thought, wow, this animation is so cool, I wish I knew how to do it. So you're probably very frustrated, and you think to yourself, how can I make my own cool animations in my app? Well, I'm so glad that you asked, because that is why we are here today, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a few different bits of knowledge to go and try and do your own animations yourself. So we're going to be covering all different kinds of animations today. The ones that we'll be covering is animated vector drawables. We'll be looking a little bit at shapeshifter. We'll be looking at property animations, custom view animations, physics-based animations, and a little bit of motion layout. But this is not it, right? There's a whole bunch more APIs that are available for you, but unfortunately, you don't have the whole day here to listen to me talk about animations. So I have a sample app online on GitHub, and this has got a whole bunch of the different animations that we're going to go through today, and you can go and check the open source library over there, and there's all just different uses of all the examples that we're working with today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about animated vector drawables. So animated vector drawables is basically a vector drawable with an animator set or object animator. So you're probably asking, what is a vector drawable? Well, a vector drawable is a scalable, density-independent asset. So this means if you scale it up to the size of your app, it won't lose or pixelate when it's displayed on screen. It'll look very crisp to your end users. And it's represented by paths. So if you have a look at the SVG spec, if anyone's dived into that or looked at what an SVG file actually is, a vector drawable is basically a subset of the SVG spec. So it's got like commands as to how you should be rendering or how it renders an animated vector drawable or a vector drawable on screen. And basically with an animated vector drawable, it is a fire and forget animation. So this means as soon as you say start, you have no control over its progress or where it can stop. It's just going to happen, and you've got to trust that it's going to happen. So this is an example of two different animated vector drawables. And you can see that these are quite little simple icons that you may want to show in your app, like as a response to somebody clicking on it. So these are really cool, and we've probably seen a couple of them in different apps, but actually, when you go and look at the documentation, it can be quite hard to make your own. It can be quite overwhelming. You have to know how to use SVG specs and know how to draw your own stuff by yourself. So there is a nice tool called Shapeshifter that helps make this process a lot easier for you, and you don't need to dive into the details of knowing exactly how to create your own SVGs and animate between them. So let's take a look at how we can use Shapeshifter to make our own animated vector drawables. So Shapeshifter is not just for animated vector drawables or not just for Android. You can use Shapeshifter for iOS, web, or Android animations. It generates all those different kinds that you would need if you want to. And with Shapeshifter, you can animate things such as the path data, which we'll show an example of that now, the alpha, color, stroke width, and a whole bunch more things that you can animate using Shapeshifter. And it's made by Alex Lockwood, and I believe he is speaking at the conference, so you should probably go check out his talk as well. But there is a whole bunch of stuff within Shapeshifter, and I'm just going to give sort of a brief overview of how I've used it. So this is an example of the Shapeshifter tool, and this is one of the animations that I've made using it. But basically, you can see you've got a whole bunch of different layers at the bottom and your animation that's happening at the top. So how do you get to this point of an animation in this tool that you can export? So I like to follow these 4 kind of steps. There may be a few more steps inserted depending on your shapes that you're using. But basically, the first thing you want to do is choose your icons that you want to animate between. And this is probably the hardest part, is like knowing what your animation wants, what you want it to look like. But once you've got that, probably the hard part is done. So once you've got that, you would then import them into Shapeshifter, and then either animate path data or alpha or whatever you want to animate. And then you've got magic, right? You've got this animation you can put into your app, and your users will be delighted when they touch those buttons. Okay, so this is how I've gone about implementing an icon animation in the app that I work on. So this is the text alignment icons. You've probably used them before, hopefully. But basically, we've got the centering of text and then justified text icon. So if we wanted to switch between them, I think a nice animation would be that those 2 inner bars just elongate out and it goes back in and out. And that'll be a nice transition between those 2 icons. So like I mentioned, you might need to split up your icons logically or like split up it into different components in Sketch or another design tool that you use. But these 2 were just downloaded straight from the Material Design Icon website. Okay, so once we've got our 2 icons, we would then import them into Shapeshifter. So we would just drag them into Shapeshifter and click on the Add Layer button. And then this will add it as a layer into the project. And we add both at this time. So now we've got our 2 different layers. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to animate between them. So we click on the first layer, and we would then click on it and animate, click on the little animate icon on the side, and click path data, because that's what we want to animate between. And then we select the second layer that we have, and we copy the path data that that layer has. And we say that this animation should end with that path data. So we paste it into the path data animation. We then delete the previous layer, and we can make it as long as we want. And now we've got our animation between these 2 different path data objects. So this looks great, right? We can ship it. Everyone happy? No? Oh, okay. Okay, well, maybe, and probably you won't have matching path data objects, and this is what you end up with. So you end up with this, weird-looking thing. So you might need to do different steps to fix this. So the first step that I like to take is to pair the subpaths together. So you click on your path data item in your bottom editor, and you click the edit icon at the top, and from there you've got your 2 states and then the intermediate animation. And then you click the pair subpaths icon at the top, and you start assigning each one to the correct one on the other side. So you can see as I go, it starts to make sure that the paths are aligning the correct ones and the correct boxes are in the correct place. So now we have an animation where the boxes are aligned and the ones aren't moving around and jumping around, but the actual rectangle isn't really animating properly. So in order to fix that, we want to use another thing called, or correct the points of these boxes. So there is another awesome little icon, which is like, please automagically try fix this. And from that, it will automatically try and calculate the smallest distance between the points and try and magically make your animation look better. But this sometimes also might not work, so you might need to manually go and move the points around, or maybe add a few more points if that makes sense. But this, luckily for us, the AutoMagic button solved our animation, and now we have this beautiful, nice animation that is flowing out nicely, no more things moving around. So we're ready to ship this one, right? Yes? Okay, cool. So what we do, we've got our animation we've made. So from Shapeshifter, we can then just export it as an AnimatedVectorDrawable file. And then within our app, we just put it in our drawable folder. And then to use it, we can use this app compat resources to get the drawable. And we just give it the AnimatedVectorDrawable that we've got from Shapeshifter. And we can set it on our image view that we have. And then if we want a callback, so like we want to know when the animation is finished, maybe we want to do something or toast or something like that, we can register this animation callback on this drawable. And then to run the animation, we just call drawable as an animatable, and we call .start. And that'll just start the animation for us, and we can then have this awesome elongated animation that's happening. Yes. Okay, so we've got our animation, we could put it in our app, and we've shipped that one. So animated vector drawables, we're good to go. So let's talk a little bit about other different kinds of animation, one which is called Lottie. So Lottie is a third-party tool built by Airbnb, and it's useful for cross-platform animations. So if you have a designer that wants to ship something really complex, and it is in Android and iOS and web, using Lottie is really powerful because you don't have to do much to do the animation yourself. Like I mentioned, created by Airbnb, and you use this thing called After Effects by Adobe. I don't know how to use it yet, so that's my next step in learning. But basically, once you've got that, you export it with this plugin, and you can then use it within your Android, iOS, or web apps. The nice thing about Lottie is that you can set the progress of your animation. So if you wanted to have this animation that shows like different states, you could animate in between those two and say, okay, only stop at 50% or go to 100% or something like that, and you can do that programmatically yourself. And another cool part is that you can also download them on demand. So you can just have them hosted on a server, and your app knows where to go get it from, and you don't have to bloat your app with this large animation if the user isn't getting there. And there's a whole bunch of animations on lottiefiles.com that you can go and have a look at. And these are all like beautiful, beautiful animations. And these, you can download the files that you want to use and then use them in your app. So how do we use it? Well, we add the dependency in our app. And then within a view that you're using, you can use this Lottie animation view. And you can give it just the file to the animation. And then you can set certain properties, like if you want it to loop, if you want it to autoplay, and stuff like that. So there's a whole bunch more stuff that you can do with Lottie that we won't be covering today. Okay, property animations. So if we have a look at another API called the View Property Animator, this allows us to animate specific common properties on a view. So this is also a fire and forget, so you can't like stop it in the middle, but it's a very user-friendly API to use. So when you have a look at the code, you'll see it's like quite simple to understand and very nice to write and use. And you can also do multiple animations at once using this. So you don't have to set up different things. You could just all set it on the one view yourself and then call start on the animation. So this is an example using it. So obviously, when we have image views on screen, we want to do everything, all kinds of animations. So I want to animate the alpha, the rotation, the scale, the duration. And then we can also know and be notified when this animation is finished. And then we can call start to actually run the animation. So here is this on display. And we are doing all sorts of kinds of things to animate this in and out. But this is just a basic view property animator. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about custom view animations. So custom view animations can get a bit tricky, but when you want to view something and the built-in animations just don't cut it. So for instance, you're not just animating alpha, or you're not just animating the translation. The custom view animations, this is where you probably need to go in order to do it. So you would animate custom properties on a view of yours. And this could be things like a color maybe, or maybe a radius, or a shadow property, or a matrix if you want, like a matrix that you apply to a canvas, you could use and animate with custom view animations. So how do we go about doing this with our own animation in our own view. So we use a concept called a property values holder. And this holds information about a property and its values during an animation. So you can create an animation with the value animator or the object animator if you want to. But basically, this gives the animation system access to properties on your view and information about what your view is currently holding. So let's take a look at how we would do this in our own view. So this is a method that I have on a custom view, and this is to animate the text size and color at the same time, okay? So we have a size that we want the text to go to and the color that we want it to go to. So we use the property values holder class, and we give it, that we say we want it to be of an integer type, and we give it either you can give it a text property as that first parameter, or you can give it the special property class if you want. And basically, you can give it the start and the end color that you want it to go to. Or if you're just using the property, you don't have to give it the start color. It can get it from the view itself. And the same thing is for the text size. So in this case, we use the float, and we say, okay, from this size to this size is where we want to go to. And now what we can use is a class called the value animator. And this gives us basically just a callback to know at certain intervals in your animation. It gives us information about when this property is being updated, and you can get the new properties from in that callback. So we provide it with our two properties, and we say we want this update listener on it. And in this update listener, this will run every single time, or throughout that whole animation, you will get the new animated values at this point. And then we can go and get them from this animation object, and we can then set the text color size ourselves on our own view, and then call invalidate, and that will then redraw, and it'll give this illusion of an animation. But it is essentially just redrawing on screen. And then we would call start on this object, and obviously our animation will then run from that point. So here is the awesome custom view that I made. But basically here, when you click on Animate Custom View, it is applying the color change and the text size change at the same time, and it is obviously scaling up and down. Awesome. So this is an example of it in a custom view animation in the app that I work on the daily. So this is animating with a matrix. So it's applying a zoom, scale, and a pivot point of the thing. So it's animating in and out, and that's using the value animator as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about physics-based animations. So physics-based animations are quite fun, and they are often referred to as dynamic animations. I think that's what it's called as the artifact when you actually insert it into your app. But basically, you can think of a physics-based animation as, because it's called dynamic, it's something that is different and not going to be the same every single time you're going to run it, right? So if you have an animation like the other ones that we've had before, there might be always the same animation that runs, like depending on your clicks and that kind of thing. Whereas with this, it might be something that is driven by force, i.e. you've like scrolled with a gesture and like you've flinged something, or you're touching in different points on your screen. So you can think of it as that, this is how I think of it as why it's called a dynamic animation. And it is said to be more natural looking, and this is because it is using physics, so the stuff we all hated in university. We can now use this, and we just apply like a velocity, a whole bunch of different physics properties, and the animation system will use this to generate an awesome looking animation for us on screen. The big difference with this is that you don't specify a duration, okay? So a lot of the animations that we saw before, we could specify a duration, and we know at that time, this is going to take that certain amount of time. But with physics-based animations, it's using all the different properties that you've set on it to get that end time per se. If you think of it like driving a car or throwing something from the top, you can't say to a balloon or a ball when you drop it, oh, you must take 2 minutes to get to the floor, right? It's just going to go with gravity and all the different forces on it, and that's the same with these kind of animations. So you can reconfigure them, and your velocity is also recalculated at that point. So you can give it a different velocity, or you can just change what its endpoint that it needs to go to, and it will change it, and it will produce a nice animation in between. So there's two different kinds that we can use. There's a spring animation and a fling animation. The fling animation is probably something that everyone's used all day when you're scrolling on Twitter or something like that. But basically, a fling animation is you can use your velocity of your finger if you're using a gesture, but basically use it for something that you're like scrolling or just want to fling something off a screen. And this is if you wanted to use the animation without it being tied to anything, so your own maybe implementation of it. So you can set things like the start velocity, friction, and a whole bunch of different properties, and then you can call start on that, and it'll run on that view. Okay, so here's an example of it working in the sample app. So we've got our golden ticket, and that is flinging, but you can see I didn't use a gesture or anything like that. I was just setting it statically on this view. But you probably want to use some kind of user-driven gesture or something like that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about spring animation. So spring animation is a pretty cool animation technique. And this allows, if you can just think of a normal spring or a slinky, I don't know if that's called the same thing here, but basically a whole bunch of springs, that, like those child's toys that you get, that multicolored. But if you had to play with one of those and like pull the thing apart and then watch it go, like obviously if you pull it further, it takes longer, stuff like that. So that's the same principles applied on this kind of animation. So if you wanted to use it on a custom view, like what I did in that previous slide, you would use something called this float property compat object. And this basically gives the view or the animation access to your custom view's properties. Like in that case, with the color dropper that you saw over there, we would set the dropper's X value and get the dropper's X value in the getter and the setter. So you pass this property, this float property animation object, you pass this into your spring animation class, and then it uses that to go and get and set the values itself. So here is how you would use it. So I create a spring animation, and you pass it in the view that you're going to use it on. So in this case, it was within a custom view. So I passed in this. And then you pass in the property that we've just created and the end point that you wanted to get to, or the end value of that property. And then you can apply also different things like stiffness and damping ratio, which we'll get to in a bit. And you call start on this animation. So this can get a little bit tricky, like there was a whole bunch of extra stuff we needed to create. But luckily for us, there is a new class within the extensions, the Android extensions. So if we switch to using Android KTX extensions, I can never get that name right, or whatever it's called, but it's basically a whole bunch of extension functions created by the Android team. And this one is for spring animations. So you can see now, we didn't need to create that float property compat object. We just pass the spring animation of class, the setter and the getter function that it needs to use, and then the current point that it needs to, or the end point that it needs to animate to. So it cleans up our code quite nicely. Okay, so if we have a look at the different properties, so remember we had that stiffness and damping ratio that we could look at. So we've got three different kinds. We can use stiffness low, medium, and high. So in the first example, you'll see that the stiffness of the spring animation is low. So you can think of it like a slinky or something like that, where it's a child's toy and it's made of plastic, and it is really bouncy, and that's how it works. But if you go on to looking at something like the medium, you'll see it doesn't bounce as much, and it's a little bit more stiff, if you'll call it that. And then the last one is stiffness high, so you can see there's like almost no bounce that is happening on this view. Cool. Okay, so looking at the damping ratio, so there's also obviously different options you can provide. You can also just set a value, but these are like the ones that are provided for you already. So the first one is low bouncy, so this means it's not going to bounce very much, but we like it to bounce a little bit. So if we look at the medium one, you'll see it's bouncing a little bit as it goes, a little bit more than the previous one. And then the last one, it is bouncing quite a lot on screen. So you can see the differences with the damping ratio. Okay. Awesome. So let's have a quick look at MotionLayout. So I'm pretty sure that most of this audience was in the MotionLayout talk earlier, right? Yes, okay, awesome. So there is a whole bunch more MotionLayout features that we won't be covering today because they were covered already this morning. But what I want to show you is some examples of where I've used it and how I've found it useful. So basically, motion layout gives you just a subclass of constraint layout. So you can do some complex UI element animations. You can drive animations via gestures and have the gesture actually control the progress of the animation, which I think is pretty cool. And I've said that. And then you can also use it for transitioning between different layout states. So if you have something that is showing like a loading screen and then going on to a different screen, you can use that for with motion layout and transition between these two states quite easily. So what you do with motion layout is you define it in XML, and it's all XML driven. You can also do it in code, but we won't be doing that today. Okay, so this is a basic example of motion layout, and what I've done in this example is used a recycler view at the bottom and an image view at the top with a Veruca salt as the name. And as somebody drags up on the recycler view, the image view is getting smaller and the background is appearing for that view. So this is all done using motion layout. There was no code written for this, but basically the motion layout scene that we created is quite simple in that it only has a few custom properties that we set. But what this is this motion scene file you create and you put it within your XML folder, and within your own layout, your original layout, you reference this motion scene that you've created. So the first thing that we define on a motion scene is the transition that we want. And this is where we provide the start constraints and the end constraints on our view. We can also set a duration here, as well as I think you can set an interpolator at this point as well. So here we say, okay, this is a transition between these two states, the duration, and the action that we want for this transition is we want it to happen when users are swiping up on our recycler view. So you can see we have the on swipe, and we say we want it when the user's dragging up on the touch anchor ID of the recycler view status. And that will give us that effect, and now we just need to actually say, as the end constraints, what the values of that image view should be. So what we've done is we define two constraint sets. So the first one is the start constraint set, and this has got the background property. So I've got that little background on that top view, and basically here we can set the alpha to be 0, so it's invisible at this point. And then the end constraints, we have if you look at the bottom part, we have the background alpha property set to 1. So that'll make sure that background comes in and out as we scroll up and down. And then the top constraint is the constraint that is set on that picture of Veruca. And this is, now we've set the width to be smaller than what it was set before. So it's set to 40 dps at this point. And then that is literally what will create that animation. So just setting it to be a smaller value and setting that background to be faded in will then create that awesome change between when we're scrolling. So here is the animation again. And we can see that that was quite simply just defined within XML. Okay. So another part about motion layout that I really like, and that's something that I've used and shipped to production, even though it's in alpha, it's pretty stable. But yeah, so motion layout keyframes, okay? So keyframes are basically when you want to specify that a certain part of your animation should be done at a specific time. So you can think of it like a whole duration. So this bottom line indicates that we have at frame position 0, that's our start state, and then at end, we're at frame position 100. And in between that, we can change our certain values. So we want a certain view to be visible at 60% of our animation. We can set that property to say, okay, at this point, you must be completely visible, and then from 60 to 100, it's going to remain visible for that certain part of time. But you may have seen some other examples where you can change like its position and then it does some cool arc motions as well. But this is using keyframes, you can do all these different kinds of things. So if we had to look at it within XML, we can go and say, With this transition, we can then specify this keyframe set on a transition. And here we can give it, we can target certain views within our layout hierarchy. And we can say, okay, at frame position 60%, this view must be completely visible. So at this part of your animation must be done for this certain view. So you can set up all different kinds of like portions of your animation to happen at certain points. So how would you trigger this from code? So for me, one of the things that I wanted to do was not drive the animation via like a button click or a drag or something like that. I just wanted it to start when the activity started or the fragment started. So you can use this method called transition to end on a motion layout, and that'll go to the end state for you, and it will animate and do that animation for you. You can also provide the transition to state and then give it the state that you want it to go to. And as of this afternoon's presentation on motion layout, there is also now that pre-roll option for you, so you can set that up as well with the new motion layout release. But this works just as well. So this is an example of a keyframe animation that we've got within our app. And you can see that all these different views come in, and a little like option button comes up and animates in and out for us at the end of the animation. So all of these things are using keyframes, and that last little bit is popping up at like 90% of the animation and animating up and then down, and then the animation is complete. Okay, so there is some awesome examples online about constraint layout. So there is, this is the bottom one is the official Google samples, where there is a whole bunch of different things you can do with constraint layouts and motion layouts. So I suggest having a look through that, because there's like 40 or so different kinds of animations you can do and learn from that repo. And then also just the reference to the app that was used within this presentation. So just a quick recap of what we covered. We covered animated vector drawables, how to use shapeshifter, Lottie, property animations, custom view animations, and motion layout. But like I mentioned, there are a ton of other ways to do animations. So there was a good talk at Android Dev Summit by Nick Butcher and the constraint layout team as well about which animation to use when. So I suggest checking that out for like a nice overview of which one you should use at what point. But the one thing that I wanted to say is that you should spend some time and just take the time to look and learn the available tools for you so that you can make some good animations within your app. So thank you so much for coming to my animation factory.